I got used to being his backup. In order to sign a contract, he drugged me and sent me to the other party's car, even took away my phone so I couldn't ask for help. It wasn't until then that I realized this love, humble for too long, is time to let go. I liked Simon for a long, long time. Back then. I really felt that as long as he could love me, I would be willing to lower myself inch by inch, even if it meant putting my life on the line. So, I willingly chased after him, being his backup. My dreams, my talents, my career, I gave up everything. I just wanted him to love me. Now he knelt in front of me, looking at me and saying, "Help me one last time. Secure this contract, and we will get married, okay?" Reflected in the mirror was a face adorned with delicate makeup. Simon leaned down, helped me put on the last earring, patted my shoulder, and said, "Let's go." In the reflection of the mirror, our eyes met, and I asked softly, "After today, shall we go pick out a wedding gown?" His lips twitched twice, avoiding my gaze, before nodding slightly after a moment. In fact, at that moment, I had already seen through his perfunctory and insincere words. But I still held on to a naive hope. After all, I had loved Simon for 5 years, always fantasizing that he might soften towards me. Not long after sitting at the table, Simon spoke up, "You look hot, let Big Brother help you take off your coat and hang it up, okay?" My hand trembled, and I could barely hold the glass in my hand. Underneath the knitted cardigan, I was only wearing a wine-red long-slip dress, with a neckline already opened very low. And sitting down had made it even more alarming in terms of exposure. Simon himself had picked out the dress for me, how could he not know? I bit my lip tightly, almost about to give in to Simon's increasingly cold gaze, when a lazy voice suddenly sounded from across. "The air conditioning is so low, I didn't think she would feel hot." I hesitated and turned in the direction of the voice, coming face to face with a pair of bright and intense eyes, as if there was a fire burning within them. It was an incredibly handsome face, with pale skin, sharp eyebrows, and a high nose bridge. Though his lips were thin, they were very attractive, adding depth to the contours of his entire face. Sensing my gaze on him, the young man curled his lips into a brilliant smile and said to me, "Hello, I'm Evan." Evan. I was momentarily stunned. The contract Simon wanted to negotiate today was with Henry, the man sitting opposite. Evan was Henry's nephew. It was rumored that Henry had remained unmarried and childless, thus he doted on his only nephew greatly. Under Henry's indulgence, Evan drove luxury cars, bought famous paintings, exuded an air of decadence, spending money carelessly without any achievements. Now sitting across from me, the young man playing with the glass in his hand did not seem as mischievous as the rumors portrayed. Even his fingers, with well-defined joints, showed traces of watercolor paint and a thin callus. Could it be that he also indulged in painting? Lost in thought, the dinner had already begun. Amidst the clinking of glasses, Simon's cold voice sounded in my ear, "Melody. Go and offer Mr. Henry a toast." I subconsciously turned my head to say something, or to catch a glimpse of the look Simon had fixed on me. But in that instant, his phone, placed on the table, suddenly lit up. It was a new message. From Gloria. "I have already picked out the wedding dress, come try it on together tomorrow, okay?" My heart momentarily froze, I tugged at my lips, and only after a while did I manage to force a very bleak smile. Gloria, she was Simon's most cherished crush. What I tried so hard to get, a bit of favor from Simon, was all but given freely once she beckoned. Simon. I quivered my lips, desperately trying to control the tremor in my voice. "You lied to me. The person you want to marry isn't me, is it?" Simon turned his head. With a haze of smoke in the air at the banquet table. Through the hazy white mist, I couldn't see his expression clearly, but I could hear his emotionless, icy voice, "Melody, this is what you owe me." From where I stood, to the main seat where Henry sat, it was only 5 steps away. These 5 steps felt like they had traversed all the 5 years between Simon and me. I had always wondered one thing, what exactly do I owe him? In the first 18 years of my life, he covered for my parents' favoritism toward me. After we met, it was him who always enjoyed my humble attempts to please him. This question had been on my mind for 5 years, and still had no answer. Wait. I stood in front of Henry, just about to raise the glass, and Evan, who had been quietly eating next to me, suddenly stood up and blocked Henry. saying with a smile, "My uncle is drunk, he can't drink anymore, let me take this glass for him, all right?" I watched helplessly as he took the glass from my hand, tilted his head back to empty the glass in one go. Evan didn't immediately return the glass to me, he smiled even more brightly. "Sorry, I forgot this was your glass. Let's just consider it as you toasting, all right?" Without waiting for my reply, he paused for a moment, then lowered his voice. "Don't drink anymore, your face is very red, go sit down." "Should I take you home?" His eyes were bright, with a wet lock of hair stuck to his forehead. This was already the second time he had come to my rescue tonight. I glanced back and saw Simon staring intently this way, his gaze dark and his face extremely unpleasant. A sudden sense of unexpected retribution washed over me. Shaking my head, I picked up a glass from the table again, filled it with wine, and clinked it against Evan's empty glass. "Thank you for standing up for me, let me offer you one now." I downed the wine in the glass. He couldn't stop me, hesitated in silence for a while, then managed to say, "Call me Evan." "Evan." The light in his moist eyes suddenly brightened. "You've really had too much to drink, go back soon." He glanced behind me, the raised corners of his lips suddenly straightened. "Wait, do you want me to drive you home?" I never imagined that in the end, it wasn't Evan who drove me home, but that I ended up going home with him. Not only that, but I also ended up sleeping with him. After the banquet, Henry declined Simon's further plans and gestured to leave. When Simon inquired about the contract, Henry remained non-committal, merely sweeping his gaze lightly over me and saying, "Mr. Simon, you have a good little sister." That sentence just threw me into hell. After Henry left, Simon said he would sober me up and went to pour a glass of ice water. After I drank it, my legs were so weak that I couldn't stand properly. He held me and walked step by step to the dimly lit parking lot, then placed me on the soft back seat of the car. Under my cold and sorrowful gaze, he took away my phone. "Simon," I could only murmur due to lack of strength, "are you not even going to give me a way out?" "Melody, Henry likes you, and I have no choice." After saying this, he walked away without looking back. But neither Simon nor I anticipated that Henry had already left in someone else's car. The car parked here was intended for Evan. When I was enveloped in an aroma of refreshing scent in his embrace, my hands were already too weak to hold onto his clothes. "Mr. Henry." It was Evan. The young man corrected me in a cheerful tone, then frowned and said, "You're drunk like this, let me take you home, okay?" As the dim car lights shone down, I remembered the fleeting anger in Simon's eyes during the drinking session and suddenly made up my mind. I don't want to go home. I threw myself into his arms, unbuttoning a button of his shirt with my teeth. "I want to go with you." The driver drove the car downstairs, and Evan carried me all the way home. He kissed the tip of my nose gently. "Don't regret it," he whispered in my ear. "Just enjoy this kind of thing." My eyelashes trembled, and I finally closed my eyes. When it was over, it was late at night. I wriggled out of his embrace and got off the bed, but stumbled due to weak legs, hitting my ankle bone on the corner of the bed with a sharp and intense pain that made me frown and let out a cold hum without holding back. Evan, who was lying on the bed, immediately sat up nervously. "What happened?" "Sister, are you okay?" His exceptionally affectionate address, coming from his pleasant voice, made me slightly stunned. The dim light illuminated his handsome face, and his lips were also painted red. There was even a lipstick mark I had just left on his bare chest. I was dazed for a moment before coming to and shaking my head. "It's nothing, just bumped the bone." Evan jumped off the bed and bent down to look at my ankle, gently touching the small red mark from the knock. "Be careful, sister." A soft, cool breath touched the wound, and as I looked down, I saw a swirl at the top of Evan's hair with a few strands standing out, revealing a lively touch of childishness. He was so young and full of energy. Standing in front of him, I was only 24 years old, but already seemed almost lifeless. All my energy seemed to have been consumed in the long and fruitless entanglement of love and hatred with Simon. While I was lost in thought, he had straightened up again, his eyes staring directly into mine, with a glint of light gradually shining in his pupils. "I'm drunk." I tried to give myself a series of hedonistic seduction acts to find a reasonable excuse, but just as I began, Evan cut me off abruptly. In my astonished gaze, he suddenly leaned forward, plunged into my arms, buried his face in my chest, and rubbed against it. Sister, you're drunk, he said, looking up at me, his eyes seemingly filled with scattered stars, but I remained sober. Sobriety. I felt a little dazed. I had said this to Simon before. When I was 19, unable to resist the drunkenness, I confessed to Simon. The next day, I barely explained a word, and he sneered disdainfully, Melody, do you really think I can't see the way you look at me normally? I lost all my strength in an instant. He saw it, but he didn't expose it or reject it. He just watched with cold eyes as I fretted and grew increasingly anxious in this unrequited love with no response. The former infatuation suddenly solidified into vivid hatred at that moment. Though my heart ached, I smiled and placed my hand on Evan's neck, saying, well, in that case, why not do it again? In that split second, I suddenly changed my mind. If Simon could torment me, deceive me, and hand me over to Henry for this contract, why couldn't I retaliate and make him suffer more than me? With that contract secured, he could marry Gloria. How could I let them have their way? The next day, when I woke up, it was almost noon, and Evan was still deep in slumber. I had originally planned to leave directly, but last night, Simon took away my phone to leave me with no way out. So, I woke up Evan and asked him softly if he could take me home. I wanted to move out and pack my things. The young man, who was still drowsy, suddenly sat up. Sure, no problem. For some reason, I sensed a hint of excitement in his voice. After a quick wash, Evan drove me back home. A Lamborghini, indeed a luxurious car as rumored. The young man driving with a lollipop in his mouth didn't look at all like a pampered and idle rich kid. Do you want me to go up with you? Evan parked the car downstairs, one hand resting on the steering wheel, turning to ask me. My gaze swept past his handsome brows and eyes. No need, I'll just go up to tidy up and come back out. You have things to do, you can go ahead and take care of them. Evan shook his head firmly. I'm free, I'll wait for you downstairs. After I got out of the car, he waved at me before I went inside. Come down soon. I didn't really know why Evan was being so warm to me. During many glances the night before, I faintly felt that his handsome face seemed familiar. But for the life of me, I couldn't remember where I had seen him. Perhaps it was because last night went well, or maybe because amidst my awkwardness at the gathering, he felt a rare touch of compassion. I only knew that in order to get back at Simon, I had to seize this fleeting warmth. Like grabbing onto a life-saving straw. The message Gloria sent during the gathering was still fresh in my mind. I had originally thought Simon wasn't home. But upon opening the door, a heavy smell of smoke filled the room. Unable to hold back, I coughed a few times, and when I turned back, Simon was already standing in front of me. Meeting his bloodshot eyes, I paused. Before I could say anything, Simon grabbed my shoulder and in a hoarse voice, he said, "Why did you come back so late?" I chuckled mockingly. Weren't you supposed to go try on wedding dresses with Gloria? Why haven't you left yet? Ignoring my sarcasm, his gaze swept over me, landing on the bright red mark on my shoulder, a trace of pain flickering in his eyes. You and Henry? Together? I pushed him aside as I entered, busying myself with packing. Throwing the computer and clothes haphazardly into a suitcase. Turning back to look at him, I smirked maliciously. Brother, it was you who put me in his car. Now who are you trying to put on a show for? Simon stood frozen in place, as if his whole being had stiffened, the light in his eyes slowly extinguishing, his once handsome features clouded over with sorrow. Once, I would sneakily caress the corners of his eyes while he slept, even place soft kisses on his forehead, careful not to wake him. And today, I suddenly realized that the fiery yet sincere affection had worn away bit by bit over the 5 years of entanglement, culminating in the moment he personally ushered me out last night. Love turned to ashes, that was all. As I dragged my suitcase past him, Simon suddenly came to his senses. Grabbing my wrist, he said awkwardly, "Last night, I came back one last time, but Melody, the car had left, and you were no longer there." It was only then that I realized how painful it still was for me. Like a sharp needle piercing into my heart, not intense, but lingering and profound, seemingly endless. Taking a deep breath, I let go of the suitcase and held out my hand to Simon. "Give me my phone back." Melody. Big brother, stop pretending. You could have found many ways to locate me. If it was Gloria who was taken, would you have given up so easily? I finished with a smile. How could I forget? You wouldn't bear to send Gloria to such a place. In Simon's moment of frozen silence, I walked out the door with my suitcase, not looking back like he did last night. When I got downstairs, Evan wasn't in the car. He had pulled out a camera from somewhere and was taking pictures of the cherry blossoms by the entrance. Seeing me come down, Evan turned the camera towards me and took a picture before putting it away and running over to take my suitcase. "Are you done packing? Let's go, sister." On the way over in the morning, Evan had arranged for us to meet with a real estate agent to look at apartments, but he unexpectedly stood us up. "How about you move in with me for now?" Evan suddenly grabbed my wrist, his eyes shining brightly as he looked at me. "We can look for an apartment in a couple of days, or if you don't want to move out, my place is spacious enough for both of us. Not only is your place spacious, but the bed is also very comfortable." I raised an eyebrow and smiled. "All right, I will pay you rent." That's how I ended up moving in with Evan, and then I quit my job at Simon's company, planning to find a new one. I didn't even go back to the office to pack my things, I just sent an email to HR to confirm. Simon had sent me many messages in between, all of which I ignored and deleted without reading. What was there to read? Just apologies, urging me to come back and help with his tasks. Before quitting, I had a pile of unfinished projects in my hands, and he was probably already overwhelmed trying to appease Gloria, who was upset about his broken promise. "Brother, don't rush, this is just the beginning." "Evan," I sat on the sofa, looking up at him tenderly. "Can we keep what happened that night between us and not tell your uncle?" He took a yogurt out of the fridge and walked over to hand me a bottle, nodding with the straw in his mouth. "Sure." Evan didn't ask why. He had been like this for the past few days, always agreeing with whatever I said, feeding me whenever he had the chance, and even leaning against me when we played games. However, after staying here for a week, this warmth and intimacy made me develop some unrealistic illusions. In the end, Evan and Simon were two completely different kinds of people. Simon didn't love me, but he didn't reject my touch either. He took pleasure in mocking me when my feelings showed. But Evan, except for the night he was intoxicated, the most intimate contact we had was just a light kiss on the cheek. After kissing me, the young boy would hurriedly retreat with a flushed face and close the door, saying, "Good night, sister." In the past, because Simon liked the type of girl that Gloria was, with black straight hair and white dresses, I had dyed my naturally curly deep brown hair black and bought a bunch of white dresses like Gloria's. Moving out from Simon's place made me feel like I finally broke free from some sort of restraint and became more liberated. Or maybe it was when I was staring blankly at the box of clothes I didn't like, and Evan walked over saying, "Sister, if you don't like them, just throw them away, let's go buy what you like." And then Evan took me out shopping. From the ground floor of the mall all the way up, Evan accompanied me, helping me try on one item after another. He would praise me non-stop as I stepped out of the fitting room, never seeming to get tired of it. It seemed like he had a natural talent for color coordination. His suggestions were astounding. In the end, I bought a bunch of different colored spaghetti strap maxi dresses and high heels, then went to a salon to dye my hair a pink-purple hue. After drying my hair, Evan ran over. "Sister, you look so beautiful." He tugged at the hem of my dress and swayed it back and forth, the unusually bright light in the shop shining down, making his already fair face look even more attractive. Evan was never shy with his compliments towards me. In the past, I had to struggle to get just a few words of praise from Simon, while Evan could say so much in just an hour. My gaze fell on his slightly exerted, well-defined fingers. Suddenly, I felt my mouth go dry. That night, when Evan came out after taking a shower, I swirled the red wine in my glass and smiled at him tenderly and seductively. "Would you like to have a drink with me?" I admit I did it on purpose. Evan had always been polite, but I didn't want to wait anymore. I had been too subservient to Simon for too long. I was starting to forget who I really was. I am not Simon's biological sister. In fact, I had never seen him before I turned 18. When I was 9, my foster parents took me from the orphanage. When I was 13, after my foster mother's sudden death, my foster father's gaze towards me became even more strangely intense. Later, I found a sizable life insurance policy with him listed as the beneficiary hidden in the closet, which made me start to doubt the cause of my foster mother's death. Around that time, my foster father developed a gambling addiction, racked up debts, and wanted to sell me to pay for a dowry. I was in college at the time. I collaborated with someone to entice him into borrowing a large sum of money, initially just wanting to drive him out of the city like a disgrace and escape far away. But he got so obsessed with gambling and paid no heed to anything, accumulating massive debts and eventually being chased to a construction site where he fell and died instantly with steel bars piercing through his chest. I wasn't unafraid. During that time, every night I would dream of my foster father, covered in blood, standing in front of me, glaring at me. I would wake up in a scream countless times, gasping for air and wiping the cold sweat off my forehead. But another voice in my heart reminded me, "Melody, you are free. You are saved." However, in the second month after my foster father's death, Simon appeared. He claimed to be my brother and brought me back home. And then, it seemed like I gradually fell in love with my brother without even realizing it. Muttering to myself, I swirled the half-filled glass of wine in my hand, and by my side, Evan reached out and took the glass from me. "Sister, you're getting drunk." Looking into his heated yet worried eyes, I curled my lips and pulled down the thin shoulder strap of my dress a bit more. Evan almost dropped the glass, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down, his voice becoming hoarse. "Sister." "Evan." I pounced into his embrace, rubbing my chin against his chest. After a moment of silence, Evan gently cupped my face and planted a tender kiss. "Sister, remember to tell me to stop if you're uncomfortable." He spoke with a natural demeanor, as if it were just a common saying. But I suddenly froze, tears almost welling up in my eyes. Between Simon and me, there were so many times. He never once consoled me, only calling out Gloria's name when I was lost and confused. Sensing that I was crying, Evan immediately panicked, stopping his actions and gingerly wiping away the tears from my face. "Melody." He rarely called me by my name, but each time he did, his voice was so gentle it could drip water. "If you don't want to, we won't continue. But please don't cry." After a long pause, it seemed like he finally made up his mind and earnestly whispered in my ear, "I like you. I'm not cowardly or impotent. Just stubborn and fragile." A long time ago, Simon opened the door to my heart. He was skilled at playing with emotions, deliberately using sporadic warmth to lure my heart and make me mistake a sense of love. But for 6 whole years, he never once said he liked me. He didn't even go through the motions. In my entire life, the only "I like you" I heard came from Evan. Evan and I, in the end, couldn't go on. Finally, as drowsiness overcame me, I closed my eyes and fell asleep. In a daze, I felt Evan carefully wiping away the tears on my face, bathing me, changing me into pajamas, and putting me to bed. Before turning off the light, he leaned down and planted a gentle kiss on my cheek. "Good night." I mentioned to Evan that I wanted to work at Henry's company. Originally, my plan was to playfully ask Evan while pretending to be drunk, then make this request. I even had my excuses and lines ready, but I didn't use a single word. Evan didn't ask anything, just nodded obediently. "Okay, let's have breakfast first, and then I'll take you there." He pushed the golden brown omelet towards me and patiently spread peanut butter on a toasted slice of bread. While doing all this, Evan pursed his lips slightly and looked at me with a serious expression, looking particularly charming. Subconsciously, I remembered last night when he whispered those words "I like you" in my ear with such seriousness. Even if it was just comforting me when I was sad, not sincere, it was already so precious. After breakfast, he went downstairs to drive, and it was only then that I realized the Lamborghini from before was gone. What he was driving now was a very affordable commuter car. Upon my inquiry, Evan pitifully explained, "Sis, rumors are just rumors, this car is actually mine. And my uncle doesn't spoil me at all, he's very strict with me. Rumors also said you love buying famous paintings. Those were all painted by me. As for the Lamborghini before?" Evan looked even more aggrieved. "I rented it for $2,000 a day." Even when the car pulled up at the Henry Company building, I still couldn't shake off the shock of the disparity between rumors and reality. Evan, on the other hand, was very composed. He naturally held my wrist and led me into the elevator to the 19th floor, saying he wanted to see Henry. The secretary politely said, "Please wait a moment, the boss is in a meeting with clients in the conference room." As she spoke, the door to the conference room behind her happened to open. With a faint smile, Henry walked out first, followed by two other well-dressed men. Simon. The moment I saw him, memories that had been deliberately hidden resurfaced once again. I froze in place, feeling a coldness even in my fingertips. Evan seemed to sense my emotions. He suddenly took a half step forward, discreetly standing in front of me. Simon's gaze fell on our intertwined hands, his face starting to darken. In a moment of silence, Henry was the first to speak. "Why is Evan here?" He looked calmly at me and Evan, as if he hadn't noticed our clasped hands. "Uncle, I have something to discuss with you." Evan's eyes flickered, and when his gaze landed on Simon behind, he raised his eyebrows and his eyes turned cold. "If Mr. Simon has nothing to do, please leave." The tone was not polite. It was then that I realized Evan had been too playful and cute in front of me, making me forget that he wasn't really a good-tempered person. Standing beside Simon, Mark, the one who partnered with him to start the company, quickly pulled him away. "Simon, let's go." It seemed like he hadn't heard, his gaze fixed on me. "Melody." His voice sounded bitter. I should have been nervous or felt a mix of excitement and pain as I used every time I saw him, but there was nothing. Evan held my hand tightly, the warmth from his fingertips spreading through my limbs. He whispered softly, "Melody, don't be afraid, I'm here now." Suddenly, I calmed down. "Long time no see, brother." Simon's eyes dimmed as he opened his mouth, but didn't say anything more. Taking advantage of the situation, Mark smiled apologetically and pulled him away. I followed Evan into Henry's office, where he earnestly introduced me to Henry, praising my work abilities extensively. The melodious voice of the youth rang in my ears, but there was emptiness with no response. As I met the sharp gaze of Henry, I suddenly understood what he was thinking. The dinner party was the first time Evan and I met, but not Henry's first time. In order to secure that significant contract, Simon had been in touch with Henry's company for 2 months. During these 2 months, Henry was able to glimpse some things about Simon from my fragmented interactions, even though I was just a stranger to him. Now that Evan suddenly proposed I work at his company, Henry's initial reaction was probably that I came to help Simon. Realizing this, I squeezed Evan's hand and spoke up as soon as he fell silent. "Mr. Henry, regarding the collaboration with my brother's company, I hope you can reconsider. The proposal is not the most optimal solution." Henry raised his eyebrows in surprise and gestured for me to continue. "A large portion of the second proposal they presented is based on my designs. I know the strengths and selling points, I know the biggest flaws, and I know how to improve it. After completing most of the second phase proposal, I just hadn't had a chance to show it to Simon yet. Those humble infatuations and the additional benefits they bring were cut off by Simon himself." After I finished pointing out the major improvements in the second phase proposal, Henry pondered for a moment and then smiled. "Ms. Melody, if you don't mind, join our newly established advertising department and work on projects there?" By the time Evan and I left Henry's company, it was nearing dusk. To show my gratitude to Evan, I suggested treating him to dinner. "It's not related to me, it's all because of your strong work abilities, sis." Evan stepped on the brakes at a red light, but, to celebrate my sister finally getting rid of trash, "Let me treat you to dinner." When he mentioned the word trash, he emphasized it, his tone carrying a hint of natural stubbornness, but he sneaked a glance at me from the corner of his eye, as if afraid I would get angry. But I just found him so adorable. I smiled, took out my phone from my bag, and started looking for a restaurant. "All right, what do you feel like eating?" Evan cheered. "Anything, sis, you decide." One of the only places where Simon didn't skimp on me was when he paid me double the market rate. So after working for him for 2 years, I had saved quite a sum of money. Treating Evan to a meal in a high-end restaurant was no problem. As Evan and I crossed a bridge with warm yellow lights shining, just as we sat down at our table, a soft voice sounded from behind. "Melody." I stiffened, turned my head, and met Simon's inscrutable gaze and Gloria's usual gentle eyes. Her gaze swept over me, then onto Evan, her expression darkening for a moment. After a moment, she smiled again. "Got yourself a boyfriend now? Come over and sit with us." "No, thanks." Without waiting for me to respond, Evan immediately declined. "I'm here to have a date with Melody, don't want any disturbances." His blunt words left Gloria momentarily speechless, and she awkwardly tugged at the corner of her lip. Her once gentle smile almost not fitting on her face. Melody, this little boyfriend of yours is quite straightforward. I knew she actually wanted to say that Evan was rude and lacked manners. After all, when Simon wasn't around, she would say such things about me. At that time, my thoughts were completely focused on Simon, and she deliberately had him do this and that for her, then promptly scolded me as soon as Simon left to buy her bubble tea. As a young girl, you should have some self-respect and know your manners. I looked at her and responded with an even more gentle and forgiving smile. Evan is only 18. If he offended you in any way, I apologize on his behalf. Evan also cooperated well, calling out from behind me, sis. Suddenly, Simon stood up, walked over, and pulled my wrist, trying to drag me away. Evan exerted force to shake off his hand, let go of Melody. He turned to Evan, softening his tone slightly. Evan, I just need to talk to my sister for a moment. I sneered, and he immediately increased the strength with which he held my wrist. Evan's eyes turned cold, standing in front of me, refusing to leave. I thought for a moment, soothing him gently, go order the food first, I'll be right back. His watery eyes looked at me, appearing pitiful under the light, like a forlorn big dog. Remember to order a blueberry cake and pan-seared cod for me. Evan finally relented, call me if you need anything. He sat back in his seat, while Simon dragged me all the way to an empty private room. He pushed me in and locked the door behind him. As the lights dimmed and brightened, I instinctively closed my eyes, then heard Simon's cold voice, you're not with Henry, so how did you end up with Evan again? I laughed, I am dating Evan, Simon. Do you have to meddle in whoever I'm with, who I'm dating? Simon gritted his teeth, his gaze falling on my purple-pink hair and the exposed bare skin. Melody, do you have no shame? Simon, people with shame wouldn't send their sister to a client's bed for a contract. Henry never contacted you again, did he? Maybe you should postpone your wedding with Gloria, brother. I said, looking at him with a smile, a mist of veiled fog accumulating in my eyes. Opening the unlocked door, I brushed past Simon. He reached out, as if wanting to grab my dress, but eventually let his hand fall dejectedly, his voice clear in my ear, Gloria and I have called off the engagement. I didn't look back or even pause for a moment. It had nothing to do with me, did it? Over the years, he and Gloria had been on and off too many times. I followed Simon's every move and could see through Gloria's intentions clearly. Simon was her current best choice, but she wasn't truly content with the situation. Given a big enough opportunity, she would leave Simon at any time for a higher place. So, I could probably still get some leverage from Gloria. By the time I returned to my seat, the food was already served. Evan was playing with a box in his hands. Seeing me coming over, he hastily pushed it to the side. Pretending not to notice, I sat down and picked up my chopsticks. Let's eat. Evan seemed hesitant to speak, looking at me for a long time, before finally asking, Sister, what did you and your brother talk about? I paused in midair with my chopsticks. He asked me how I ended up with you. Also, he said he broke the engagement with his girlfriend. What's that got to do with him? Evan's face darkened, his gaze sharp, now glancing over at Simon at the table behind me, his voice more urgent, Sister, don't trust him. That night, he had ill intentions towards you. His actions were not sincere, even Evan could see it. That night, Simon was determined to push me towards Henry. Henry also said something ambiguous to him, leading Simon to drug me and place me in Henry's car. If Evan hadn't kept the subsequent events a secret, I could never have joined Henry's company. I looked at the young man in front of me, who was staring at me intently, his eyes gleaming as if they were shining. I remained silent for a moment, slightly curling my lips. I understand. Also, sister, Evan hesitated for a long time to tell me, but I'm not 18. I stared at him, somewhat astonished. I would turn 22 in half a year, about to graduate from university. He looked at me very seriously, but the glints in his eyes seemed to carry a different meaning. Sister, I'm not a child anymore. For a moment, I felt a strange familiarity in his words. But before I could delve further into that, the box Evan had hidden was now pushed in front of me. Sister, this is a gift for you, celebrating your release from suffering. It was a necklace. A delicate platinum chain with an intricately carved rose pendant embedded with a ruby. After he helped me put it on, the rose hung perfectly in the middle of my collarbone, complementing the cold white skin and looking exceptionally beautiful. When did you buy this? Why didn't I know? He blinked, seeming to think for a moment before saying, I went out yesterday while you were dyeing your hair and picked it at the neighboring mall. Evan looked at me, eagerly seeking praise. Do you like it? I also cooperated, earnestly praising, I really like it. He sat back contentedly and continued eating. I suddenly remembered. Evan was like this at the dinner party that night too. If he hadn't gotten up to block the drink coming towards me, he would have been eating the whole time. Turning the wine glass in my hand, I jokingly said, Do all you young boys have such big appetites? Evan immediately put down his chopsticks, looking a bit nervous. Sister, do you think I'm eating too much? I can eat less. I couldn't help but laugh. Evan, why are you so cute? He opened his mouth to speak, but Gloria, who knows when, came over with a glass of wine in her hand. Evan, I'm sorry for offending you earlier. It must have been Simon who informed her of Evan's true identity, as Gloria unexpectedly came to apologize. She held the glass of wine in front of Evan, softly biting her lip and looking at him apologetically. She looked so pitiful, with a hint of stubbornness amidst her gentleness. Simon always fell for this act. I watched Gloria's performance with interest, seeing the desire flickering in her eyes, knowing full well what she desired. Evan, perhaps, was the higher ground she had just found. Sorry, I have to drive Melody home later, so I can't drink. Evan didn't take the wine glass, just looked up, glancing at her with some amusement. Disappointed, Gloria stood there unwillingly, but Evan added, If you have nothing else, please leave. Melody and I have some personal matters to discuss. Perhaps Simon had told her that Evan was not to be offended. Although Gloria looked quite aggrieved, she left without a word. Once she was gone, Evan chuckled. After dinner, Evan drove me home. Having had some drinks, I closed my eyes and leaned back in the seat. Suddenly, I heard his hesitant voice, Sister, are you free next Saturday? I opened my eyes and turned to look at him. Evan pressed the brake in the dimly lit parking lot. It's my graduation ceremony, and I want to invite you to attend. Perhaps influenced by the alcohol, I fell silent for a moment, then lifted my lips slightly, leaning closer to him. I may be free, but what status should I attend your graduation ceremony in? With close proximity, our breaths entwined. In a hoarse voice, Evan called out, Melody, as my girlfriend, of course. And then, he kissed me, gripping my shoulders. His lips were soft, with a blueberry sweetness in the air. The temperature gradually rose as a hand clasped my waist, moving up along the bare back. Sister, Evan breathed lightly and took a step back. Let's go home. He held onto my waist as we got out of the car, but as soon as he stood firm, his gaze turned cold all of a sudden. Just a step away, Simon was standing there, his eyes filled with deep pain as he looked at me. A strong sense of relief swept over me from the bottom of my heart as I hooked my arm around Evan's neck and smiled lightly at Simon. Why is Big Brother here? In the dim light, his face was as pale as paper, a cigarette between his fingers, scattered cigarette ashes on the ground. I didn't know how long he had been standing there. I realized that he must have seen everything that went on between Evan and me inside the car. After dropping Gloria off at her place, I suddenly thought to come and see you. I nodded. Big Brother. You can leave after you've seen me, Evan and I are going home. He seemed stunned by some word, and a vivid pain glinted in his eyes. Melody, our place is your home. I almost chuckled. Simon, is that really my home? Do you believe that yourself? But after that surge of emotions, I felt deeply desolate. When I was 18 and Simon first brought me back, I also thought that was my home. But I quickly realized that I was incredibly unfamiliar with the arrangement and placement of things in that house, even less so than Gloria. Simon had no intention of explaining it to me, just letting me figure it out on my own. After living there for 6 years, I didn't even have the qualification to change a piece of painting. Once, when Gloria came over to our place as a guest and played video games with Simon, she suddenly said she wanted to eat teddy bear cookies. I searched for them in the kitchen for a long time and even got a cut on my finger from the sharp edge of the biscuit tin. As I brought the cookies back, I caught Simon and Gloria kissing. Simon had his back to me, but Gloria, hearing my footsteps, lifted her gaze and looked at me with gentle yet mocking eyes. I fled in panic. In stark contrast to him was Evan. On the first day I moved into his place, he took me around every inch and every corner of the house, from the entrance hall to the kitchen, from the bathroom to the storage room, making sure I understood everything, afraid that I wouldn't know how to use things due to being a stranger or feel constrained. He looked at me and said seriously, "Sister, you can do anything you want while living here. I have no secrets from you." In the study, I also saw Evan's easel and learned that he, like me in college, studied oil painting. Simon's eyes darkened. "I'm not." I chuckled and interrupted him. "I think that place would be more suitable as your and Gloria's bridal chamber. Since I moved out, I have no intention of going back." Simon froze in place, the light in his eyes completely extinguished, devoid of any vitality. I hugged Evan, turned and walked away without a second thought. Even without looking back, I could feel Simon's gaze following me closely. After taking 2 steps, Evan suddenly turned around, pecked me on the cheek, and invited, "Sister, want to take a bath together tonight?" The burning gaze on my back suddenly disappeared. When I reached the front gate and turned back to look, Simon was nowhere to be seen. When I got home, I changed into a nightgown and went to find Evan. He was in the study setting up a picture frame, and when he saw me come in, he hurriedly put it away and then looked up, suddenly stiffening. "Sister." I smiled sweetly at him. "Were we going to take a bath together?" Evan was clearly moved, but still uncomfortably turned his head away. "I did it to help you make him jealous." The following week, I successfully joined Henry's company. The first project I embarked on was the Phase 2 proposal I had mentioned to Henry before. Due to the smooth progress of the project, Henry rejected Simon's request for cooperation, only saying that his proposal still had flaws. On Saturday, I accompanied Evan to his graduation ceremony. At first, I didn't know which university Evan was from. However, as the car drove along the tree-lined avenue I was so familiar with, and stopped at the entrance to South University that I had been in and out of countless times, I couldn't help but speak up. "Evan, are you my junior?" We had been living together for nearly 2 months. And he had never mentioned it to me. After parking the car, Evan turned to look at me, a flash of light in his eyes that disappeared. "Sister, you didn't just find out today, did you? I hadn't heard you mention it before." His eyes dimmed slightly, but he quickly adjusted his mood. "It's okay, just remember it for the future." I suddenly realized that Evan never seemed to show any negative emotions in front of me. He was always sweet and clingy. Even though he was 2 years younger than me, Evan arrived in my life from the beginning as a protector. A soft spot in my heart seemed to be touched, and as I got out of the car, I reached out and clasped Evan's wrist, saying softly, "Let's go." Graduation season, the school is filled with a mix of lively and sentimental farewell atmosphere. Walking on the familiar avenue lined with parasol trees, a sense of sourness gradually surfaced in my heart. 2 years ago, I missed my own graduation ceremony. Apart from the normal studies in the 4 years of university, I almost devoted all my spare energy to the long and fruitless entanglement with Simon. Even in the last month before my graduation, Simon started a business partnership and asked me to help. After knowing each other for 4 years, he spoke to me for the first time in a gentle and almost pleading tone. "Melody, come and help me, please." I compromised. I gave up my own dreams, gave up my almost sharp talent in painting, gave up the opportunity for further study abroad recommended by my teachers, and willingly stayed behind to work as a designer in Simon's company. To help him secure the first contract, I drank until my stomach bled and ended up in the hospital, missing my own graduation ceremony. However, it wasn't until 3 months later that I learned Simon had registered 20% of the company's shares under Gloria's name from the very beginning. "Sister, Melody?" I suddenly came back to my senses as Evan placed a bachelor's cap on my head and lifted his camera to my face, saying, "Sister, smile for me." I instinctively raised the corners of my mouth, and in the next moment, I heard the shutter click. In the lively atmosphere, Evan took a bachelor's gown from another guy beside him and handed it to me, his eyes shining. "Sister, come and take photos with us." After a moment of daze, he quickly grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the crowd. Following along, we ran, formed a huge heart shape on the lawn in front of the library, painted the school emblem on our cheeks, and threw the bachelor's cap high to take a photo of the graduation ceremony I had missed, unexpectedly completed in the year I met Evan. In the familiar school auditorium, as Evan pulled me up on stage to move the tassel, I saw the familiar painting teacher, Laura. "Melody? Why did you come back to school?" Her eyes flashed with surprise for a moment, then quickly turned to recognition upon seeing Evan next to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, Evan grinned and said, "Ms. Laura, my girlfriend is here to accompany me to the graduation ceremony." Laura seemed to express some emotions. Before leaving, she pulled me aside and whispered, "Since you've come out. That's good then. Evan is a good boy, take care of each other." I fell silent for a moment. It was her who recommended me for further study abroad. After I declined, she was disappointed. After much persuasion, I finally told her that I had someone in my country that I couldn't let go of. She seemed to have guessed something and sighed, "Melody, the one who truly loves you will not ignore your future. I'm worried that you will regret it later on." I thought of high school for some reason. Back then, I was so proud, walking through the school with an easel on my back, as if I owned the entire universe. As long as I held a paintbrush, I had the courage to face any difficulties. I had never thought that one day I would shatter my pride and self-esteem with my own hands, trampling them underfoot. On the way back, I remained silent. Evan seemed to see through my thoughts and suddenly changed direction halfway, driving to the largest park in the city. It was dusk, the golden light reflected on the lake, creating a warm ripple of colors. He took out an easel, paper, pens, and paints from the trunk and handed them to me, saying, "Sister, would you like to try painting?" Since graduation, I hadn't held a paintbrush again. Simon didn't like me painting. Once I took a picture of him sitting by the window with colorful lights flowing behind him, and after I painted it and made it look perfect, I showed it to him as a treasure, wanting him to hang it on the bedroom wall. Simon just glanced at it indifferently and said, "I don't like things hanging on the walls." After that, with the company's start and everything being busy, I had no time to paint. And then we moved houses once, even my easel and paints were left in the old house. But later, Gloria painted a digital oil painting, with colors even streaming out. He still carefully framed it and hung it by the bedside. At Simon's place, there were never paintings he didn't like, only people he didn't like. As I came to my senses from memories, I completed the last stroke and showed it to Evan. He ran over joyfully, his eyes bright as he looked at the paper. "Sister, you painted me." Evan's clear and pleasant voice perfectly matched the young man in the white shirt with a corner fluttered by the wind in the painting. He stared at the painting for a long time, then looked at me, his eyes sparkling with delight. When I returned home, I framed the painting. He said, "This is the first painting you drew for me, and I will cherish it." He carefully preserved my intentions and later handed me a painting that had been completed and framed. "Sister, take a look." It was a scene of me leaving Simon's house under a cherry blossom tree, drawn from a photo he took. In the painting, there was a suitcase by my side, the plain white dress a bit wrinkled, yet the eyes were surprisingly bright. In the midst of emotions, there was a sense of relief, liberation, and also hidden beneath the calm surface, a simmering resentment. Evan painted it with great care and dedication, even capturing the 2 petals that fell on my shoulder, and he wrote the title and name in the lower right corner. "A New Beginning." I stared at those 2 words. A surge of strength rising from the depths of my heart, sprouting, watering, and blooming. Evan and I each hung the paintings given by each other in our bedrooms. He even set up an easel in the study room for me to use whenever I wanted to paint. As I gradually picked up the dreams and talents I had lost over these 2 years, over at the company, the advertising department I was in had snatched 2 contracts in a row from Simon. With the support of Henry's company, not to mention that I had spent 2 years with Simon, almost single-handedly raised their design department, taking orders from them wasn't difficult at all. It was just that I always had a soft spot for him in the past. Faced with successive business failures, Gloria, who always sought profit and avoided harm, was on one hand perfunctorily dealing with Simon, and on the other hand, looking for new opportunities. One noon, as usual, Evan came to the company to bring me lunch. Sitting in the tea room, his face showed a strange expression. "I just met someone downstairs." I raised an eyebrow and looked at him. "Who?" "It's the girlfriend of Simon, the one I met in the restaurant that day. She scratched my car, insisted on getting my contact information, and said she wanted to treat me to dinner to make up for it." I hadn't expected Gloria to act so quickly. "And then?" "I asked her to contact my uncle's driver for compensation matters. He always handles such things. How could I agree to have dinner with her?" Evan said, sneering, "With a clumsily executed scheme." I then realized that Evan's youthful and sincere nature, although naive, also meant he didn't mince words. There was a playful tone in my voice, but at least she's a pretty girl. Melody. Before I could finish my sentence, Evan suddenly leaned in, his nose touching mine, his gaze intense, and his warm breath mingling with mine felt scorching. You can't say that, you're my girlfriend now, and it would make me unhappy. I like you, and I can only see you in my eyes, he said earnestly, holding my face and forcing me to look at him, whispering between our lips, sister, open your eyes and look at me. After a pause, his voice suddenly lowered, with a touch of gentle humility, can you say that you like me? Just to make me happy. Those clear and bright pupils enlarged in front of me, and I stared at him in a daze, a strange sense of familiarity flashing through my heart. It's okay if you don't want to say it now, he said as his eyes slightly dimmed, taking a step back. Sister, I have the patience to wait for you to speak. Even though I knew that the sly boy in front of me was likely trying to curry sympathy on purpose, my heart couldn't resist a slight ache. This ache nudged me forward, and I kissed Evan on the lips and declared in his suddenly ecstatic eyes, I really like you now, not just to make you happy. That afternoon, Evan left with a silly smile on his face. Just as he left, Henry appeared at the door, his face still beaming with a smile that he hadn't managed to suppress. Uncle, Henry glanced briefly at Evan, then his thoughtful gaze fell on me. I didn't sense any negative emotions from him, and finally, I let out a sigh of relief. It seemed like passing through Evan in front of Henry paved the way for a more open relationship. He enjoyed cooking for me and would eagerly come to the office every day at noon to deliver food, not hesitating to show his affection for me in front of others. His unabashed favoritism. How could I not be moved? So, everything fell into place. Evan was tall, probably due to his good physical strength, as he never seemed to tire. He took care of almost all the household chores and wouldn't get tired even after staying up late. I had also talked to Evan about my graduation and work, only to learn that he had been working part-time at an art studio since his third year, eventually investing money he earned from Henry and his childhood New Year's money. He was very down-to-earth, nothing like the idle and profligate Evan rumored about. It was only then that I could finally relax. That afternoon, when Evan came a bit later, I went downstairs to meet him and unexpectedly bumped into Gloria at the elevator entrance. She saw me and her face showed surprise. Melody? Wait, how come you're here? I gazed at her curiously. I work here. Gloria was suddenly taken aback, and her expression gradually turned unpleasant. After a moment of silence, she forced a smile and said, Melody, how can you let your boyfriend arrange a job for you? A girl should rely on herself. I couldn't help but chuckle, staring at her mockingly. Gloria, are you even qualified to say such things? Gloria's tactics were not up to par, or else she wouldn't have spent so long just to get Simon to commit to her. Now that I had bluntly retorted, she immediately lost her cool. Clutching her handbag tightly, she looked at me and forced a light smile. Melody, leaving that aside, it doesn't look good for you to jump from Simon's company to here, isn't it? Until she firmly secured the next opportunity. Gloria wouldn't give up on Simon. After realizing this, I knew that half of my goal had been achieved. I had built up the design department in Simon's company single-handedly. I smiled at her, so, if I want to leave, I can do it anytime, and no one can stop me. Gloria looked at me in astonishment. She must have been used to seeing me behave submissively in front of Simon, to the extent that she couldn't handle my newly found pride. Melody. Evan's voice suddenly rang out, breaking the frozen atmosphere between Gloria and me. He came over to me, didn't even look at Gloria, and just cuddled up to me affectionately. It's so hot, let's go up quickly. I had expected Gloria to do something, given that he was now her new target. But she simply stood there and showed her usual gentle smile. Melody, Evan, have a good one. As the elevator rose, the enclosed space was just the two of us. Then Evan suddenly spoke. She has changed her target. It took me a moment to realize he was talking about Gloria. He looked at me, lips curled with a hint of mischief, revealing his sharp canines. When the driver went to deal with the compensation issue, my uncle happened to go with him and saw her. Later, she made sure to get my uncle's contact information and is trying to set up a meal with him. Gloria had shifted her focus from Evan to Henry. Thinking back to how Simon had tried every trick in the book to get me into bed with Henry, it felt like fate was fickle and ever-changing. After half a month, one afternoon when Evan couldn't come to pick me up, he asked me to take a cab home. As I stepped outside and stood by the roadside, a familiar black SUV pulled up next to me. Simon's cold eyes peered through the car window. "Get in." I didn't move, leaning on the car and glaring at him expressionlessly. Simon's eyes narrowed even colder. "Melody, are you making me repeat what you've done in front of passersby?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Go ahead, tell me, what have I done?" Simon opened the car door and stood in front of me, staring down at me with a scornful smile. "You slept with Henry first, then hooked up with his nephew, and now you've joined Henry's company, using every means to snatch contracts from me." "Melody, how did I not see before how capable you are? I certainly didn't have the kind of ability Gloria possessed." I smiled at him. "Perhaps if you had sent her to Henry's bed in the first place, the results would be even better." Before I could finish speaking, a heavy slap landed on my face. The sharp pain spread instantly, and I turned the soft flesh in my mouth, turned my head to look at him for a moment, then suddenly raised my hand and struck back even harder. Simon's gaze darkened instantly as he gritted his teeth. "Melody, Simon, you really should see how your crush is flirting in front of my boyfriend and his uncle." I watched him with a smile. "As for the so-called contract stealing, it's just each to their own abilities." "Bro, that's your and Gloria's company, what's it got to do with me?" Why should I hold back? He must have been so used to me acting like a lovesick puppy in front of him that he was momentarily unable to adapt, just staring at me blankly. I gave a cold laugh, then walked away without looking back. The slap Simon gave me didn't have much force behind it, but it left a faint red mark on my face, so when I got home, Evan saw my face and his gaze immediately darkened. "Sister, who did this to you?" Before I could say anything, he suddenly snorted. "It's Simon, isn't it?" I scolded Gloria in front of him, and he got angry. I reassured him. "Don't worry," I hit back right then and there. Evan raised his hand and gently caressed my cheek with his fingertip, his eyes filled with a tender expression like a puppy. Then he earnestly promised, "I'll make him pay." At first, I thought Evan was just joking. It wasn't until during a casual conversation at work that I learned that the cash flow in Simon's company had broken, and Evan was dead serious. That evening, Evan drove me home. As soon as the car parked in the underground garage, a figure suddenly flashed in front of us. It took me a few seconds to recognize that it was Simon. Unconsciously, the traces of him in my heart had faded to almost non-existence. Evan raised an eyebrow, suddenly reached out and held my hand. "Don't be afraid." He stepped out of the car, positioning himself between me and Simon in a protective stance, chin up, looking arrogantly at him. Simon was actually quite tall, but standing in front of Evan, he seemed to be towering even more. Although he was younger than both of us, he was no longer the thin frame of a boy, standing up straight like a tree. His momentum wasn't any weaker than Simon's. Simon looked at Evan with a blank expression. "Have I offended you in any way?" Evan sneered, looking very disdainful. "Mister. Simon hit my girlfriend, and you ask if you've offended me?" Simon opened his mouth, and when his gaze fell on me, there was a hint of malice. "Evan, are you feeling like a savior just because you're relying on your uncle? What does the private matter between me and Melody have to do with you?" "Yeah, I rely on my uncle. Are you just relying on yourself?" Evan chuckled in anger. "These past 2 years, if it wasn't for you using Melody, getting her projects done, accompanying her for drinks to win orders, would you and that woman's company have grown so fast?" Rising on the back of a woman and then biting back, facing someone shameless like you is really unfortunate for Melody in our family. Furthermore, with a cold and fierce gaze, you shouldn't always feel like Melody owes you some things. If looked into closely, from the very beginning, it's you who owe her. He didn't hold back in his words. By the time he finished speaking, Simon's face had turned pale. Seeing that he had nothing to say, Evan took my hand and walked away without looking back. When we got home, before I could ask, Evan had already admitted, "Sister, the cash flow problem in Simon's company was indeed arranged by me through my uncle." He looked at me, with a hint of caution in his eyes. "You're not mad at me, are you?" I looked at him blankly, unable to speak for a moment. He was standing up for me. How could I be mad at him? I just thought back to the past. I had lost my self-esteem. Abandoned my dreams to chase after Simon. Everyone could see the twisted and unequal nature of this relationship, only I was stuck in the middle, sacrificing everything for that tiny bit of warmth without hesitation. I almost forgot that I, too, deserved to be loved. After a long silence, I finally asked him, what exactly is it that Simon owes me? A complex expression flickered in Evan's clear eyes. Finally, he sighed, leaned over and kissed my lips. I'm still investigating this matter, sister. If I get any concrete leads, I'll tell you immediately. The kiss sealed off the other question I wanted to ask, which I ultimately didn't. Henry had been in the business world for over a decade. His tactics were much more cunning than the inexperienced Simon at the beginning of his entrepreneurship. Even if he fought with all his might, he could barely keep the company from Henry's hands, and as a result, he was too weak to bother coming after me. It was at this time when Evan suddenly handed me a bank card when he came to pick me up one evening. There were 50,000 yuan on it. He stepped on the brakes at the red light, then stole a glance at me with the corner of his eye. Sister, I took one of your paintings to the gallery for consignment. This is the price after the sale. He paused slightly. Sister, keep painting. You have such talent, it shouldn't be wasted in cubicles and boring design drawings. After a moment of silence, I took the card. All right. I didn't actually dislike painting, it was just the numerous rejections from Simon that shattered my pride and led me to submit to him. Evan truly understood me. After being silent for too long, I needed something to prove my worth, to show that my talent hadn't been completely eroded away in the mundane world of hustles and bustles. I picked up the paintbrush again, just like I did in high school, devoting almost all my spare time to the studio. Evan seemed very happy and back at home. He sat with me in the studio. Apart from occasionally going out to answer a call, he sat across from me painting, his eyes occasionally glancing at me. Evan's talent in painting was not inferior to mine at all. On the weekend, he and I sat together in front of the easel in the study, with sunlight streaming through the glass window, casting a layer of light golden color on the floor. I turned my head and saw the boy holding a paintbrush, completely focused on the easel in front of him. Suddenly, the scene felt incredibly familiar. That day, when he silenced me with that kiss and the unasked question resurfaced, have we met somewhere before? Sensing my gaze, Evan looked towards me, a radiant smile appearing on his lips. Then he stood up and walked towards me. A breeze blew in from the window, fluttering the curtains. In the flowing air, I tilted my face up to look at him, and Evan leaned down, planting a warm kiss on my lips. The paintbrush, stained with colors, fell to the ground, splashing paint that spread a hint of fragrance in the air. It felt like an eternity had passed. He stepped back slightly, crouched down with one knee beside me, his eyes wet with emotion staring at me. He asked me, Sister, do you remember now? Memories from the past suddenly rushed back at this moment. I remembered that I had indeed seen Evan before. In the winter of my senior year, Simon changed the locks at home to coerce me. Unable to return home during the winter break, I stayed at school and took up a part-time teaching job at a training studio. Because the income was good, I continued to do it. There was a tall, slender, high school student who often came for classes. Although his strokes were still immature, his sensitivity to color combinations was already enough to be astonishing. But at that time, he was not using the name Evan, and I was so preoccupied with my entanglement with Simon that I barely paid attention to his appearance, only recalling his wet eyes that held a mix of pride and defiance. And then, Simon, for once, humbly sought my help. He was too skilled in his ways, gradually drawing me into the illusion of a gentle trap, and in the end, I gave up my dreams and agreed to him. The last time I taught Evan, I asked him about his dreams. He seemed a bit flustered, saying he wanted to get into the best art school in the country and that even though his family was not well off, he would work hard. I smiled faintly, gave him the salary I had earned from the part-time job, and left him. I parted ways that day, went through the resignation procedures, and never went back to that studio. As I snapped back to reality from my memories, I looked at Evan in a daze, and he gazed at me expectantly, asking if I remembered. The young boy's handsome face showed a hint of shyness, revealing his intentions. His real purpose for going to that studio was not to learn from me. At first, he wanted to challenge me. Sister, you paint really well. So when you said you wanted to give up and handed me your salary card, I was shocked. I dug around for a long time, slowly piecing things together, he said, rubbing his cheek against my hand. Simon is not worth it, you know? Do you know? I dreamt of seeing that proud Melody that my teachers used to talk about, the one with the talent and perception for art that seemed innate. When she picked up the paintbrush, it felt like nothing in this world could hold her back. He continued, and the pride and dignity that Simon took away from me, you helped me regain them. I should thank you for that. But I remained silent for a long time, then asked softly, so, did you know from the beginning that Simon would hand me over to Henry? His eyes widened in panic. No, Melody. Why did Henry suddenly swap cars with you when he left that night? Why did the door that should have been securely locked open so easily at Simon's touch? Why did you have a condom in your pocket that night? Was it just a coincidence? I laughed self-deprecatingly, suddenly feeling incredibly pitiful. My foster parents adopted me but treated me strictly and coldly. After my foster mother passed away, my foster father's gaze towards me became increasingly eerie. During my 3 years in high school, I spent all my time outside of class in the art studio, without making any friends, only having a not-so-close ally. Later, when Simon gave me a little warmth on the way home, I couldn't wait to get close to him. And now, Evan saved me from a dilemma and straightforwardly confessed his feelings for me. I fell completely for him. It was only then that I realized my initial desire to seek love and security from others was a mistake. I stood up and walked quickly towards the door, causing Evan to accidentally knock over a pallet of paint in a frantic attempt to catch up and explain, no, Melody, I wanted you to see Simon's true colors, and also what's in my pocket. But he struggled to say the second half of the sentence. I firmly pushed his hand away and turned to face him, speaking slowly, taking advantage of someone's vulnerability. What makes you any different from him? I moved out of Evan's place. I left in such a hurry that I didn't even take the paintings I made, just packed a simple suitcase. When I was leaving, Evan, with red eyes, came chasing after me, wanting to explain a few things, but I raised my hand to stop him. Evan, I'm not completely rejecting you. I believe in your sincerity, but this beginning hasn't been pleasant. I think we both need some time to cool off. I was surprised at how calm I sounded when saying those words. Evan seemed visibly hurt, looking at me pitifully. Melody, I can apologize, I really didn't mean to. Almost immediately after being met with his teary eyes, I felt like surrendering. It was at that moment that I realized how much I actually liked him. Anyway, let's take some time apart first. I closed the car door and urged the driver to start driving. Even though it was a move, I couldn't shake off the feeling that it was more like a one-sided escape. The next day, I went to the office to submit my resignation letter. Since there were still work matters to hand over, I couldn't leave immediately, and the HR quickly informed me that Henry wanted to see me. When I entered his office, I passed by a girl with twin ponytails. Her delicate face seemed somewhat familiar. Inside his spacious office, the faint scent of alcohol lingered as Henry sat in his chair, loosened tie, with smudged lipstick marks around his lips. Overall, the scene seemed a bit less serious. Despite that, he remained composed, wiping off the lipstick marks with a tissue and gesturing for me to sit across from him. Ms. Melody, rest assured, I'm not the kind of unreasonable parent type who will meddle in the feelings between you and Evan, he said, smiling gently and composedly. I just want to clarify 2 things for Evan. First, when I said those words to Mr. Simon, it didn't imply any feelings towards you, I was simply helping Evan out. Second, the condoms Evan had in his pocket that night were bought for me and my girlfriend, who is a celebrity and cannot reveal her relationship publicly at the moment. He didn't know how to explain it to you, he just wanted you to see your brother's true colors and then make sure you got home safely. Henry, you knew about that night? Evan promised me he wouldn't tell you. Henry seemed to sense something from my expression and chuckled. Ms. Melody, please believe me, a mature man like me is different from your naive, simple boy, Evan. He even said Evan was a bit naive, which was true. Actually, I supported Miss Melody's resignation. Mr. Simon's company has been struggling, and Miss Melody's talent should be used in a better place. Henry interlocked his fingers, resting his chin on them, gazing calmly at me. As for your relationship with Evan, I won't get too involved. Before I left, he called out to me again, oh, by the way, Gloria. Henry pronounced the name with a hint of unfamiliarity, perhaps not remembering the person so well. I gathered all the chat and call records of Gloria trying to invite me for dinner and other activities, packaged them, and sent them to your email. That night, I worked late. It wasn't because of overtime, but because my mind was filled with too much. Sorting through each issue took a while. I had initially planned to go home, but suddenly remembered that I had left some things at Simon's house and decided to retrieve them. Unexpectedly, after all this time, Simon still hadn't changed the locks. I tentatively turned the key and lightly nudged the door open. After a brief moment of astonishment, I entered and was overwhelmed by the strong smell of alcohol. Furrowing my brows, I switched on the living room light. The man who was slumped on the sofa suddenly lifted his head and, upon recognizing my face, his lips trembled, his face turning pale. I had never seen such profound despair in Simon's eyes before, like a whirlpool dragging someone infinitely downwards. Melody. He stood up suddenly, stepping towards me. "You're back?" His tone was cautious, as if I, standing before him, were some precious yet fragile porcelain. The only person who could make him speak with such tone before was Gloria. For some reason, I felt an urge to laugh. Simon reached out his hand, seemingly wanting to touch my shoulder, but I quickly took a step back, avoiding it. "Mr. Simon, we are hardly acquainted. Let's not get touchy-feely, okay?" I said calmly, "I'm here to get my stuff, and then I'll leave. You don't need to worry. As for this act, you don't need to play it anymore. We both know that your previous display of heartbreak and longing in front of me was just an act to soften me up, so I would come back and continue helping you. Isn't that right? Human nature is such." Simon never cherished my affection from the beginning, so how could he really wake up to it after he sent me away himself? It was all an act. Perhaps there was some genuine regret, but 3 parts true and 7 parts performance. And when a person puts on such an emotional appearance, it is only for the sake of something. Clearly, my design capabilities still had some utility for Simon, so he was unwilling to let me go. In an instant, the despair in his eyes deepened even further. "Melody, I'm not." Simon's voice was incredibly hoarse. "I misunderstood about your parents." He didn't finish the sentence. I followed his gaze and only then noticed a few sheets of paper scattered on the coffee table. The words on the paper were very clear. Initially, Simon's biological parents and my parents had collaborated to start a business, but when I was abducted, my parents were too distraught to focus on work, which gave them an opportunity to swallow up a significant portion of the company's shares. Later, my father noticed this and wanted to separate the shares of the 2 families, but they took all the cash in a hurry and fled, only to get into a car accident on the way. Both adults died instantly, and Simon was lightly injured and fell into a coma. When he woke up, recovered, and was discharged from the hospital, my parents took him in regardless of the past animosities. They weren't harsh to Simon, but they repeatedly told him since he was very young that he must find me in the future given the opportunity. Seeing this, I suddenly understood everything. Why did Simon say I owed him? With such parents who cared only for profit and forgot about loyalty, and taking the money and running away, how they brainwashed Simon, it was quite obvious. Furthermore, after my parents really adopted him, they didn't treat him exceptionally well, which made Simon feel increasingly indebted. When they were gone, he transferred that resentment onto me. I set down those pages, and when I looked at Simon in front of me, I suddenly found my past unwavering determination to be pathetic. In truth, Evan was right. If it hadn't been for that night's direct confrontation, I would have still been caught in Simon's blunt knife tug-of-war, gradually getting used to that long and endless pain until I completely became his puppet, never to wake up. Actually, Evan saved me. Thinking of this, I threw the few sheets of paper at him and smiled gently. "Simon, I don't accept your apology. I don't like you anymore. You can rot in the mud with Gloria." After moving out of Evan's house, he didn't contact me for several days. I thought he was actually calming down, but when I returned home from work one evening, I found him pitifully squatting at my door, jumping up excitedly when he saw me. "Sister," then he wobbled a bit, and I quickly stepped forward to support him. Evan then fell into my arms, burying his face in my shoulder, his warm breath brushing against my skin. "Sister," he said woefully, "my foot's numb." Helpless, I could only bring Evan back home. Once inside, he took off his backpack from behind and pulled out a painting. I realized that the painting was of me. With the desolate ground, the fiery skirt scattered all over, the soft chestnut hair cascading down, juxtaposed with the golden red glow of the sunset on the horizon. But the face in the painting didn't quite look like me now. "This is you from 2 years ago," Evan said. "Sister, I dreamed of you often after that, like a proud and beautiful rose, blooming even in the desolate wilderness. Later, I tried every means to find out your whereabouts because I felt you shouldn't be trapped in his mire." Pausing, he looked at me with a suddenly earnest gaze. "So I took matters into my own hands this time, but I just wanted you to see him for who he really is and then take you back home," Evan said. "Melody, I didn't mean to take advantage of the situation. The rose wasn't bought by me, I designed it a long time ago to give it to you, because I like you." Evan had told me many times before that he liked me, but never like now, nervously, as if waiting for the final judgment. In fact, I had known for a long time that the rose necklace was not, as he previously said, bought at a mall. A colleague told me that this brand always accepted custom orders. I just hadn't thought that even the design was drawn by Evan himself. Those proud bones that Simon had carved out of my body with a blunt knife, amazingly, with Evan's help, were slowly beginning to reappear. Before this, I never thought that I could pick up a paintbrush again and become the proud and composed Melody. I was silent for a moment, finally reaching out my hand in Evan's hopeful and cautious gaze, gently embracing him. "I like you too," I said with my eyes closed, as devoutly as reciting wedding vows. From then on, Simon was permanently removed from my world, replaced by Evan, aside the brushes and easels. Later, Evan and I moved to Paris and rented a nice space for a gallery. Not long after the gallery opened, we held my first solo exhibition. By that time, I had become a somewhat renowned oil painter in the art circle, attracting a variety of visitors to the exhibition, including Henry and his girlfriend, the girl with 2 ponytails. She generously purchased the most expensive painting and even posted a 9-grid on Twitter praising it. I was grateful and offered to paint her portrait. She blinked at me and said, "Don't be so polite. I genuinely like your paintings, much more than Evan's." The young boy next to her, undaunted by the comment, proudly declared, "Our Melody is really talented." I squinted at him, tapped his shoulder, and smiled flirtatiously. "It's impolite not to call me sister." He turned to look at me, his eyes moist, and remained silent. Only when all the guests had left did he lean over and whisper in my ear, "Sister, when you called me brother last night, it wasn't like this." My cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Last night, fueled by some drinks and the excitement of the upcoming exhibition, I had worn a short strap dress and insisted on dancing with Evan, letting my fingertips wander on his shoulders and cheeks, teasing, "Little brother, are you living off me?" He leaned in to kiss me, saying, "I am." Evan proved to be quite good at living off me since my legs still felt weak. I glared at him. And Evan quickly apologized, "Sister, I was wrong." In the midst of our laughter, a figure suddenly appeared nearby. I looked up to see Simon. I had sporadically heard gossip about him, how he managed to secure financing from somewhere and actually save the sinking company, subsequently expanding it. And then there was Gloria. I hadn't shown Simon the evidence I had on Henry, but somehow he and Gloria still broke up, with him even reclaiming the shares he had given her. Today, after more than a year, Simon appeared much thinner, with a sense of desolation etched in his appearance, yet his gaze remained as cold and stern as ever. Evan immediately stood guard in front of me as Simon approached. Without a flicker in his eyes, Simon said, "Melody, I have something to tell you." "I have nothing to say to you," I retorted. In the past, Simon might have reacted angrily, but at that moment, he continued to gaze at me calmly, his eyes filled with a complexity of emotions that I couldn't decipher. And I didn't want to understand. He smiled faintly and said, "If you don't want to hear it now, that's fine. I've sent it to your email. Whenever you have time, take a look." With that, Simon left. It wasn't until we were closing up the exhibition in the afternoon that we realized he had bought a painting, a piece depicting a lake with swaying lotus leaves that I had painted. It suddenly struck me that it was actually Simon whom I had gone boating with. On my 20th birthday, when Gloria was absent, he finally managed to spare a day to accompany me for 2 hours of rowing. I was ecstatic. Even if Gloria called him away later that night. I thought it was the happiest birthday I had ever had. But when I painted that picture, those memories had completely faded from my mind. All I could recall was my 26th birthday when Evan took me from boating to roller coasters, from bungee jumping to carousel rides. Easily attained, I failed to cherish them, only reaching for stars that no longer belonged to me.